Hey everyone, I am your friend Joseph Craven. This is, of course, 40 Minutes of Hell, both a nice basketball reference and an apt description of what it feels like to have to listen to me talk about basketball for so long. Just ask my wife. This is, of course, the day after the NBA draft. We've had time to kind of process everyone's picks. If you joined us on the NBA draft live chat on YouTube that I did with my good friend Jim Strickland, aka Jimmer, don't confuse him. Jiminem, don't confuse him with Eminem. I almost said Jimmer, don't confuse him with Humor. I don't know where I was going to go with that. He joined me. During the live chat, during the NBA draft for a live chat, we had a great discussion about some of our favorite players, being Pelicans fans, being guys from the Southeast and, not too far from New Orleans. Really enjoy seeing all of that as well. He's a big-time Pelicans fan. He's most notable for being the guy who went viral on social media for his fake out on burning the AD jersey when the trade was demanded from Anthony Davis and drawing a unibrow on himself. Anyway, he streams on Twitch, Jiminem, Jimnm. You can find him there. It's a fun, family-friendly channel on Twitch. If you're into watching some Twitch streams, he mostly does the Fortnite thing. That's not my style, but I'd love to play with him someday so he can see just how terrible I am at these games. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into some breakdown of every single team and draft pick. Here we go. We're going to go in draft order. So we're not going to go in pick order. We're going to go in team draft order. So we're going to start, obviously, with New Orleans and the pick of Zion Williamson. But we're also going to discuss their other first-round picks and their lone second-round pick as well. So New Orleans, obviously, you love the Zion Williamson pick. He's the future. He's the completely brand new, ridiculous freak athlete. Future direction that the NBA is going in positionless basketball, all that sort of stuff. We don't have to harp on that subject anymore. That's a good pick. You have to go Zion number one. Right as your former number one pick in Anthony Davis leaves, you bring in a new number one pick in Zion Williamson to build around, along with making those trades that kind of speed the process along a little bit. But what about their other picks? What do we think of them? And this is where things are a little bit unsure. I mean, you start off with Jackson Hayes, a hyper-athletic big from Texas who is known as being a late bloomer. Hadn't been, playing the sport for as long and, really hasn't developed any signature skills in the game other than the fact that he's really tall and very athletic. It does make sense to go after him to make a hyper-athletic front court with Zion. The questions about Hayes is that he doesn't seem to have much of a reputation as being a good defender so far, based on what little I've seen of him and what scouts are saying about him. But he is known to catch everything that's thrown to him. He has apparently huge hands. Catches everything that's thrown to him, dunk everything that he can, which makes him, very comparable to Zion's most marketable skills. So it's a pretty clear move here from the Pelicans to find a complementary transition big man, running the court type of big man, which seems to be what Hayes is good at and what scouts are saying he's good at. He outruns most other players on the court, guards or bigs, in transition. So you would think that those lobs being thrown from Lonzo Ball, who loves the fast break transition game, to Hayes and to Williamson, you would have to think that, that's going to be a very exciting thing down the line for the Pelicans. I still wonder if it was necessary to use the 8th overall pick on him, though. Moving on, Nickeil Alexander-Walker from Virginia Tech's a catch-and-shoot player, which is something the Pelicans badly needed. All reports that I see about him say that he's not great off the dribble, which makes him a bit of a question mark, as far as his pro potential goes. But then again, you don't use the 18th pick in the draft on a big-time playmaker. You use it on someone who's going to fill an immediate need for you, and that's what the Pelicans did here. So this seems to be a pretty good fit, of what they're going for. And then their other pick is Marcus Luzada-Silva, known as Didi Silva. He's their second-round pick. A potential 3-and-D project there, so it makes sense to go with him because that's another need the Pelicans have for that coveted 3-and-D role. All in all, the belief was that the Pels weren't done making moves and that they didn't really want to have to use the 8th overall pick, but were hoping to move it for somebody else. In particular, maybe move it up for the chance at RJ Barrett and have Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett play and develop together, which would have been very riveting. But they weren't able to, or maybe they just didn't actually want to after thinking about it and ended up picking up the accessory pieces they think will work. And so in that regard, I'm not sure that the Pelicans ended up being bold enough. Every move that they made leading up to the draft was a phenomenal move. Every move in the draft was okay. That being said, David Griffin in post-draft interviews said that fans need to trust him because he's working to connect all the dots, which shows that he's always been a man with a plan. This shows that he still has a plan set in place, right? And the Pelicans have a potential of around $31 million in cap space this summer. So everything points to them not being quite done with making moves yet. I don't think we'll be able to really evaluate the Pelicans draft class right after the draft because I expect the team to look different in October than it does right now. But just off of their picks, this is like a B+ draft class, A-ish. Obviously, it's going to be up in that A range because Zion is Zion and all of that. But I feel like they weren't bold enough with the picks compared to where they were going and where they wanted to go. And that's why I hesitate to really give it an A, especially not an A+, as far as overall picks go. I would stoop to the point of even saying top to bottom, B+ at best. So that's where I'm going with a B+ rating for the Pelicans all in all. But that being said, I think that we really judge this draft class when the season starts, not right now, because I think there'll be more moves. Memphis came in at the number 2 pick, and ooh, my goodness, Memphis is doing it right. So last year, they grabbed big-time potential modern big man Jaren Jackson Jr., who I'm a big fan of. This year, they snagged Ja Morant, who is my personal favorite player to watch in this draft, and I believe that they are perfect fits for each other. Morant is a phenomenal passer, along with his insane athleticism, his improving shooting touch, his natural scoring ability. Just a great player. More up-tempo than Mike Conley. They've given him the reins now with Conley out of the way in Memphis, and I think he and Jackson Jr. are going to be great playing off of each other. Oh my gosh, especially in a pick and roll or pick and pop game if Jackson continues developing a perimeter shot. I love that combo. I think that's going to be a great combo. But then there's Brandon Clark from Gonzaga, who I really liked going into this draft, and I really love the fact that Memphis grabbed him later in the first round. The way he plays is essentially Zion light, if you will. He's a 6'8" power forward, a great athletic defender, and he converted a stupid 74.3% of his shots at the rim this past season. He's too short to be a real NBA big, but I mean, it's the modern NBA, positionless basketball, all that stuff. He's too good to ignore, regardless of what his height actually is. He's a little bit of an older prospect, so maybe not as much room to grow, but you think at this point in time, he's also more ready to contribute right now. It also helps him that he can guard most positions, and, did a very good job with that. And he will be outstanding in the transition game because he excelled at that in Gonzaga. With his instincts and his versatility, you would think that he could be kind of their Draymond Green role in like a transition or playmaker out of the 4 spot. I don't know how great a playmaker he is, but you would think that, the 6'8"-ish player who can guard most positions and run in transition, that's a role that people really like in the NBA right now. They love the multi-position defender. I mean, basically the Shawn Marion type, That's really what Draymond Green is. He's just a better distributor than Shawn Marion ever was. As very much like Draymond, don't expect Brandon Clark to develop much of a perimeter game. But either way, these are A+ picks by Memphis. It's a great fit for the athletic, fast-paced direction that they're trying to go. Love these picks by the Memphis Grizzlies. New York Knicks, of course, had that 3rd pick. They only had 2 picks, and they decided to keep the 3rd one and go for RJ Barrett after some debate whether they would try to move it because, let's be honest, they didn't seem like they wanted it. RJ Barrett is a great player. He's a very comfortable 6'7" guard who handles the ball especially well. for his size. His issue is whether he could show enough improvement in his rougher areas, like his shooting touch or being a little too left-handed oriented on his drive, in order to be a guy that the team can actually be built around. I think he's got a very high ceiling and a moderately low floor if it ends up being that way, which is what separates him from Zion and Ja, who have like high ceiling and high floor type of build to them, type of look to them. Barrett, at best, could possibly develop into, to compare him to a lefty, James Harden, being a guy who wasn't necessarily the smoothest offensive player coming into college. Like he was, but he wasn't like known to be like out jumping people. He wasn't known to be hitting insane step back 3-pointers all the time. He really, since he got into the league, Harden has gone from being he's pretty good. Also, I think a number 3 pick, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he's pretty good coming out of college. We're not sure exactly where he'll go, but he turned into an offensive nightmare. And I think RJ Barrett can do that now that he's been given the freedom to be his own guy, not be compared to Zion on the same team, just compared to him in terms of being a rookie. And as well, develop into a little bit more of a leadership role of what he, was coming out of high school and when he was originally a higher touted recruit. And so I think that, I think at his ceiling is going to be a James Harden level offensive threat if he continues working on his overall offensive game. His worst case scenario is something along the lines of Harrison Barnes, who I think of particularly because both of them at times seem to be very, very rigid when trying to shoot. RJ has the upper hand over Harrison Barnes because he still has such great ball control and like body movement that Barnes never seemed to have. But his shot can be very, very rigid. So that's kind of the floor there. I think he'll be a better version of Harrison Barnes, but he reminds me a little bit of the hype that was surrounding Harrison Barnes when he was coming out of high school and kind of underwhelmed. For the record, though, I don't think RJ Barrett underwhelmed at all. I liked him. The Knicks also snagged 6'7" forward and Ignas Brazdeikis from Michigan. He was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year, but he's also a big-time work in progress as far as the pros go. It's good that they snagged him late in the second because there's a chance that he never really makes it as a pro, and so they didn't gamble much on drafting him. I do think he will stick around in the NBA because every report that I've seen on him so far praises his work ethic and his aggressiveness, which honestly is more important in the pros than a lot of raw talent when it comes to sticking around like that. I'm going to give the Knicks a solid B grade, mostly because of the circumstances. They wanted the number 1 or number 2 pick. They didn't really want RJ Barrett, but they eventually talked themselves into him, and I think he's going to be good for them. The Knicks, though, are in the middle of a much larger rebuild than Memphis and New Orleans are in. And they have to handle a much more difficult situation, and it's become trickier than they initially thought because they only got that number 3 pick. But hey, they continue scrapping the team. They suck and tank next year, and get a top 3 pick again. We could be talking much differently about the Knicks. Atlanta coming into the draft, I believe held every single first round pick, if I remember that correctly. Atlanta really wanted that number 4 pick from the Pelicans and made the move for that. Because they've had their eye on DeAndre Hunter for a while now. DeAndre Hunter and Jarrett Culver from Texas Tech had been the long projected 4 and 5 picks, and Atlanta wanted to make sure that they didn't miss out on the guy that they wanted. Hunter's the archetype for the modern forward. He can guard just about anybody, all the while having a very solid shot. And an improving outside shot as well. He could probably be a Jay Crowder level forward, guarding multiple positions and being a really good spot-up shooter. He's not the best athlete in the world, and there will be question marks about how effective he will be as a pro when it comes to scoring, but who cares? Atlanta's not drafting him to average 30 points a game. Atlanta is drafting him to be a highly covetable, elite 3-and-D player, and he has the potential to be one of the absolute best at it. And then later on, and you get Atlanta drafting Cam Reddish, the oft-overlooked Dookie in this draft. He has worlds of potential, especially when you look at his power forward frame but guard skill set. Reddish has been drawing a few Paul George comparisons, and while he's not the athlete that Paul George is, I don't mind these comparisons much. While DeAndre Hunter isn't going to be asked to score a whole bunch, at least not at first, I think Reddish will be asked to pick up some of the offensive slack, and I think he can develop into that. And importantly, this is because Atlanta's looking at Trae Young at guard, Reddish at the 3, Hunter at the 4 as their like Draymond style, or elite 3 and D Jay Crowder style, which are, I mean, there's two roles that every team in the NBA covets tremendously: playmaking and defensive 4, and 3 and D wing. That's it. Every team loves those two roles more than anything else. And I think that Trae Young, Reddish at the 4, the 3, Hunter at the 4, along with Kevin Huerter as the number 2 and John Collins at the 5. That's a solid young core. But the key there is going to be whether Trae Young can keep up his productivity coming into his sophomore year, and I do still question that. The Hawks' second-round pick was Bruno Fernando from Maryland. He's a big man, around 6'10", 240 or so, 7'4" wingspan. He's one of those highly athletic but incredibly raw from a skill set standpoint sort of bigs. There are question marks about him, but it is the second round, and they were really focused on Hunter and Reddish early, so there's not as much pressure on Fernando here. All in all, I like these Atlanta picks here. I think they complement Trae Young very well. There's a lot riding on whether Trae Young can continue to play at the level he's playing, or whether he'll start to fizzle out some, a la Brandon Jennings, who he kind of reminds me of a bit. But this is a very young and high potential team. Atlanta right now is the largest high risk, high reward team, I think, in the NBA when it comes to their youth right now. They could crash and burn. They could succeed at it. But as far as just this draft goes, I'm going to give them a clean A. I think that it was a good draft for them. I liked what they were doing there. Moving on to Cleveland, you got Darius Garland, and this is, all right, it's not who I was expecting at number 5, but here he is. Garland, of course, is a highly promising offensive-minded point guard who creates his own shot very, very well. When we were doing our live stream, I made the comparison in Cleveland with Garland and Sexton to CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard in Portland. And then Garland himself made that same comparison later on in the day in an interview, so it made me feel really good about myself. Garland's play style is definitely Dame Lillard-esque. So it really shows that Cleveland is going to go a different rebuilding route than the other teams in the draft who are going for the positionless players or whatever it may be. Most teams are aiming for modern-day bigs to start their rebound, and Cleveland is going to go for modern-day guards. It's different, and I don't know how well it'll work, but a lot of Cleveland's success is going to ride on their other 2 late first-round guys, who I happen to really like. Dylan Windler is a kid that I like coming out of Belmont. I love him, actually. I watched him in the tournament especially. He got some national attention, which I think was very good for him. He's considered to be one of the top shooters in the class right here, and as a 6'8" wing, he brings really good height to a long-range shooting position. He shot a very nice 67% from two-point range over the course of his career and 41% from deep, which is really solid, my goodness. He plays off the ball pretty well, too, so he doesn't have to create his own shot, but he did average 21 points a game last season for Belmont, which shows that he can create his own shot if he needs to. I honestly imagine him kind of being the next Kyle Korver in a lot of ways. And then after that, Cleveland made some moves to go get Kevin Porter Jr., who was one of the most intriguing prospects in this draft because as a 6'6" guard, he brought in the ability to do a lot of things that other players just can't, that they just don't have the skills for. He's strong, he's athletic, he creates his own shot masterfully well. But his biggest issue is his discipline and mentality. Is he going to work hard? Is he going to stay out of trouble because he had those issues in his 1 year at USC? He's super intriguing, and I think he's absolutely worth a gamble. He was one of the prospects I was super curious about going into this draft. I think he's a bit of a, Iman Shumpert or J.R. Smith type, but maybe with much more of an offensive mentality. So if he avoids some of his undisciplined leanings, I think he pays off big time for the Cavaliers. So the Cavaliers drafted 2 role players who mimic former Cavaliers from their title run, the Korver-esque Windler and the JR-esque Porter. Dan Gilbert has a type. I'll give him that. But I'm going to give the Cavaliers a B rating. It's better than average because I really like Dylan and I like Porter. But I'm unsure about Garland as their 5th overall pick. Because now I don't know, you've got Sexton, Garland. Do you put Porter at the 3 and Windler at the 4? And I don't know what you do with it. I'm just uncertain about Darius Garland. But this has the potential, and of course the question marks surrounding Kevin Porter. This whole class is a B class with potential to become an A class easily. In the 6th spot, Minnesota stepped up, made some trades because they clearly missed Jimmy Butler, and they wanted to get the most natural Jimmy Butler comparison in the draft in Jarrett Culver from Texas Tech. He's a 6'7" guard. He has good fundamentals on both sides of the ball as a two-way player. A little bit inconsistent at times on both sides, oddly enough. But the good news, like I said, is that he's very similar in style and build to Jimmy Butler, but without being the crazy person that Jimmy Butler appears to be. That means that he might fit very well into the Timberwolves rotation very quickly because they still kind of miss that Jimmy Butler role and what Butler brought to their team. This will give Culver some time to get good playing time, but also not have the pressure on him to develop instantly, but still develop along with the key players that Minnesota has in place. This is maybe the most natural pick outside of like the top 2 picks of Zion and Ja Morant. Minnesota picking Culver here, it just seems natural. Jimmy kind of shocked Minnesota by demanding to get out, and now they have a semi-quick patch to that issue with his quasi-clone Jarrett Culver. They picked in the 2nd round Jalen Nowell from Newell. Wow, I don't know why I'm stumbling over his name. Anyway, he's from Washington, 6'5" guard, Pac-12 Player of the Year. Every report that I've seen about him shows him probably developing in the G League for a year or so, and that's about it. Unsure what his pro potential might actually be. So not much to say about him. But this right here, I'm going to give him a solid B+ because it's a natural fit getting Culver and making that move. It's really solid. I don't know if you really get anything out of Jalen, but B+ all in all for Minnesota. Then you get to Chicago and Coby White. He's a very, very likable kid, unless maybe you're a Duke fan. We're talking about a big 6'5" point guard with insane speed and the ball control to catch defenses off guard. Very respected as a catch-and-shoot guy as well, and seems just in general to be a really good teammate. His question marks come from his actual passing ability as a point, his distributing. He doesn't necessarily always make the right decisions, partly because he tries to play at a far faster pace than everyone else around him. Which I think all of this makes sense for Chicago, because if you're a team that had good recent success with a fast-paced score-first point guard like Derrick Rose, then maybe you want to grab a guy who kind of is reminiscent of that in a lot of ways. And so I like the Coby White pick for Chicago. Their 2nd rounder was Arkansas big man Daniel Gafford. Arkansas just wasn't a very good team this year. Gafford was a solid positive for them on account of him being that bouncy big man that the modern game of basketball loves so much. He still has, questionable motor, like actual skills on both sides of the ball. He has to show a lot of growth before he can actually really make the roster, much less make an impact. But I'm going to give the Bulls as a whole an A- here. White was a natural selection for them. They're still lacking a lot as a team, but they wanted a point guard that could push the offense and push the tempo. He's going to work well in transition with Zach LaVine. He's going to work well in a dribble and kick out to Lauri Markkanen from 3. He needs to become a better passer, or else everything will implode. But I really like White to the Bulls. I think that's solid. Washington, this one was interesting. Washington picked up Rui Hachimura, who I love. I really do. He's a great player, and he's a great story. I mean, being the first Japanese player to ever be drafted. I liked him a lot in college, but I do question what he'll be able to do as a pro. And in particular, it was weird for me to see him taken in the top 10, thinking that he probably would have been more of like a 12 to 15 range guy, but I don't know. Either way, here we are. He's a 6'9" big. He's not a good enough shooter to stretch the defense, consistently at least. He isn't a quick enough, of a wing to show, or doesn't show enough passing vision to dominate like that. He's very solid at most things he does, but maybe not elite at anything outside of like his mid-range shot. His mid-range shot is like really, really good. So he kind of reminds me a bit of like Markieff or Marcus Morris. forwards who can play either spot but maybe don't excel at either one, which is why I wonder about him in the top 10. But hey, Washington sees something they like, yeah, I mean, they're hoping that he is the piece that they need there. They also snagged the very annoying, if you happen to be an SEC basketball fan and not a Tennessee fan, Admiral Schofield. This kid just has a feel for hitting key shots that really frustrate opponents. He's not necessarily quick or fluid, even though he was playing a wing like his entire career. But his 245-pound frame, or 240-pound frame at 6'5", make him a super intriguing prospect in the modern NBA. He could be pretty solid if he continues to work on his jumper the way that he has the last few years in college. This is an interesting pick. He could carve out a nice little niche for himself in the pros. I'm iffy on Admiral Schofield. I'm iffy on all of the Tennessee prospects, I'll be honest with you, in this draft. But Schofield's the one that I do think has the most pro potential out of all of them because he's a unique enough kind of big, kind of wing to play that position that so many teams like. Washington, I'm going to give a C- for these picks. I think Schofield was the smarter pick than Hachimura. I've been wrong in my life a lot, so I'm probably wrong about this too. But I just don't care much for this. I'd even be tempted to drop them down to a D. Phoenix drafted Cameron Johnson. He's a very interesting older prospect, especially as a 6'9" guard forward. I say guard because he's supposed to be one of the best shooters in the draft, but it seems as though he's projected to play as a stretch 4 in the pros, which I think is interesting. And it's interesting because he's not necessarily outstanding on defense or in rebounding. Most scouts that you read have him as the best shooter in this draft, mostly for his versatility in that he can shoot well off the catch and shoot, he can shoot well off the dribble, but off the ball, he doesn't necessarily move around as much. On defense, he's a liability. There's question marks about whether he's physical enough in his slender frame to be able to play good post defense, or if he's quick enough to guard on the wings. Maybe those questions don't matter as much for the Suns. I mean, they got DeAndre Ayton down low. They got Josh Jackson as a physical wing that they're hoping finally finds his footing in the pros this year. And of course, they got Devin Booker as one of the borderline top guards in the entire league. So Cam Johnson is probably just going to be playing. He could play anywhere from the 2 down to the stretch 4 with his height, that's for sure. They're going to put him wherever they need him to be in order to take long-range shots. In Johnson, you're getting a shooter, maybe nothing more than a shooter, and that's probably just fine. The Suns' other pick was Ty Jerome. That's Virginia's double-dribbling hero. At 6'6", he played either guard position in Virginia, mostly the off guard, but scouts who have looked at him a lot say that he has great pick-and-roll passing vision and believe that he has a good enough vision and ball handling in general to be more of a point guard in the pros, which is something Phoenix really needed more so than they needed another shooting guard. Jerome is also quite good as a defender. There are some questions about his athleticism and whether he plays under the rim too much, as opposed to above the rim. That's not important for what they will probably need from him. They will probably want him to kind of develop into like one of their primary ball handlers and have him use that pick and roll vision that he's being lauded for. At his height at 6'6" and his good defense, if any of that translates well, that's a good pick. Phoenix, I'm going to give him a flat C on this one. I like the Ty Jerome pick more than I like the Cam Johnson pick. It stands out a little bit more because I'm just not sure why the Suns wanted to prove their outside shooting that much with both of these guys. But Jerome offers more defensive versatility, so I think he's a better pick for them. Charlotte wanted a wing. Charlotte got a wing. The Hornets picked up P.J. Washington, 6'8" forward with a 7'3" wingspan and a proven offensive skill set. He's a pretty good defender and rebounder, but he really stood out in college for his versatility on offense. The main question here is whether or not Charlotte even needed a wing like this. I mean, they wanted him, clearly. They went for him. But Washington is, he's kind of more that modern 4/3 based on his quickness and ball handling ability, or lack of quickness, lack of ball handling ability, as opposed to a true wing. Whereas Charlotte could probably have used another outside threat to help Kemba Walker if they can keep Kemba Walker around. So that's interesting. In the second round, the Hornets snagged wing Cody Martin from Nevada and big man Jalen McDaniels from the San Diego State Fighting Kawhis. Martin is an odd player in that he seems to stand out as a 6'6" point forward. He's got a long wingspan, good height, and because of that, he's kind of scouted as being a wing, but he actually played quite a bit at Nevada as their primary ball handler and distributor. Part of this also is because he can't shoot, and he doesn't really even attempt threes all that much, why I think that he gets scouted as a forward and not an actual guard. But scouts do heap praise on his ball handling and his passing vision. So he seems like a really cool prospect. I'm very curious to see how he develops. But again, does this fit a need in Charlotte? Do they really need a ball handling forward? And then you got McDaniels, 6'10" power forward with, once again, good ball handling skills and decent enough quickness to overlook the fact that he weighs less than 200 pounds. He was picked late in the draft. He might not really ever earn a roster spot, but they decided he was worth a shot. Charlotte, I feel like, didn't do much here. Their first round pick in PJ Washington is a safe pick. And I think they went with safe and best available over addressing any actual needs that the team has. And then went with, rough prospects in Martin and McDaniels in the second round. I don't feel like they addressed any needs. And because of that, I'm going to give him a D. I think Washington is a fine player, but I don't think he's what they needed. And when you get to Miami, you get Tyler Hero, 6'6" guard from Kentucky with a great shooting stroke, who probably underperformed this past year on account of only hitting 35% of his three-pointers, which is kind of an odd percentage for someone who's projected to be an elite shooting guard, right? The good stuff about Hero kind of ends there. He didn't stand out in really any consistent way. He established a name for himself because he happened to hit more clutch shots than he did hit volume of shots. He wasn't very good in a half-court offense. And if noted, as noted, if you are supposed to be a really good shooter coming in the pros, then maybe you should hit more long-range shots than you do, right? Miami's clearly hoping that he's a decent enough ball handler to play either guard spot and be their either-or guy there, and hopefully complement Josh Richardson and Justice Winslow. And of course, he is quite young. Hero has a lot of time to improve on all these question marks, but as far as what he's proven right now, he's basically proven that he's Grayson Allen who hasn't proven anything, basically. Especially not whether or not he's a consistent defender. They also picked KZ Okpala in the second round. He's a 6'10" forward from Stanford. They used him as a creative playmaking forward who also hit a solid 37% of his long-range shots. There you go. A second-round pick, shot better than you did, Tyler Hero. Okpala is a raw player, especially in terms of his defensive instincts, which is probably why he slid into the second round after being projected as a mid to late first rounder initially. He's got great basketball IQ. He was a good passer, could be a wing or post playmaker, which would make him a very promising player there. Maybe more of a more offensively capable James Johnson. I'm going to give them a C- because I like Okpala. Anyone other than trading up to 32 in order to grab him at number 32, and I think this would be a D draft rating. I just don't like Hero that high in the draft. I like Hero, and I think he will be fine in the pros, and I think he will find his shooting, but just don't like him that high in the draft. Hopefully he proves me wrong, but I don't see enough out of him right now to justify that. The Boston Celtics might be in a bit of trouble after losing their vets in Kyrie Irving and Al Horford. Well, okay, so it's not like a done deal that both of them are gone, but it does kind of look that way. It does mean that Boston should probably address those potential losses here at point guard and at center. So naturally, Boston didn't. And instead, they went with wing player Romeo Langford from Indiana, who they didn't really need, along with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Which perhaps means they're still open to the idea of moving one of those players. I don't know. Langford is a very good athlete, great size, great wingspan, great finishing ability. He's also known as a pretty solid defender. His issue is that he can't shoot from deep, or really he didn't, he couldn't shoot from deep very well last year, possibly because he had a thumb injury that plagued him for most of the season that he just tried to play through. He lacked consistency quite a bit during his one collegiate year. If he stays healthy, and because he has a lot of potential here, if he stays healthy and works hard, especially in becoming a more consistent defender and passer, then he'll be a good player, I think. The problem here is while I like him, I don't like him in Boston. I just don't get it. Then they go with Grant Williams. He was their late first-round pick, and he's got a lot of fight in him. He really does. But I don't understand the pro appeal of Grant Williams. First of all, there's no way he's 6'8". I saw on ESPN he was listed as 6'8". There's no way. He's like 6'6" tops. If you're going to be a modern-day big man, and you're a little bit shorter than the modern-day big man, then you really should make up for it with really, long arms, quick feet, great defense, great playmaking ability. Williams doesn't really have that sort of stuff. He's a hefty dude, but he ends up really kind of being Brandon Bass without a mid-range jumper. I don't know how well Grant Williams translates to the NBA. He's incredibly smart on the court, incredibly smart. And he's a decent enough passer that he could probably figure out how to be a bit of like a low-post playmaker type. But I just don't know about him as a first-round pick. I think that this is Boston panicking just a little bit because everything went their way for a few years and then stopped, and now they're trying to make up for it. And they might have made up for it a little bit with their second-round picks, Carson Edwards and Tremont Waters, but is that really enough? Edwards gets a few Lou Williams comparisons, and I'm all about anytime you can get anyone compared to Lou Williams, I'm all about it. But he gets those comparisons because he creates shots in crafty ways. In the NCAA tournament in particular, he really established his ability to hit off-the-dribble shots. But at 6 foot even, he's maybe not the ball handling and distributing piece that Boston really needs to complement their young star guards in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Tremont Waters is another pesky SEC guy who seemed to hit big shots against conference opponents whenever he needed to. He's another three-point off-the-dribble shooter who created pretty well for himself in that regard. But again, he's less than 6 feet tall, which will make it a little bit harder for him to find pull-up jumpers against good NBA opposition. And he didn't seem as crafty in his interior attacking as like an Isaiah Thomas type to make up for his height. He's a good passer. He averaged 5.8 assists per game last year with LSU, which maybe is going to be what he has to rely on in order to make a case for himself in Boston because they need a distributor. But all in all, Boston's going to get a C- from me on this one. Good players, but maybe only two that actually fit what they need, and those two happen to be second-round guys. I don't really think that Edwards or Langford are necessary for their needs right there. And I don't know if Grant Williams and Tremont Waters have enough pro potential to cut it. Detroit comes up next. I said during our live stream that if you have a chance to snag a European-trained youngster at the 15th spot, you do it and you never look back. And that's what the Pistons got in Sekou Doumbouya, the French-Ghanaian forward. He fits the modern forward frame so well, 6'9", great fluid movement and athleticism. His issues mostly stem from the fact that he's only played the game of basketball for a few years, so he tends to dribble a little too high, and maybe he's still learning how to let the game come to him and not force much. Detroit did well in what the Clippers didn't do well, in letting Blake Griffin be a little bit more of a ball-handling four, and that's what Sekou Doumbouya could possibly be as well. He's young, quite young. I think he's only 18 still, so he's got potential to grow quite a lot as a player. And he could be a natural replacement for Blake as Blake gets older. Doumbouya will need to work on his shooting touch, of course, and getting a little bit more in control with his ball handling, along with, proving that he is a good defender, because he's a little offensive-oriented right now. But I think this was the absolute right choice for Detroit. They also snagged 3 second-round players, Deividas Sirvydis, that's a fun name to say, from Lithuania, Isaiah Roby from the far-off land of Nebraska, and Jordan Bone from Tennessee, another Tennessee prospect here. This has to be the best Tennessee class ever, coming from a school that really doesn't have much of a men's basketball tradition. If Sekou Doumbouya wasn't enough for you in terms of 6'9" Euro-trained youth development players, then Deividas Sirvydis fills the gaps. in particular because he's much more of an outside shooter than Sekou Doumbouya is. Davidas played in the Adidas. Wow. Davidas played in the Adidas Next Gen tournament of the EuroLeague Final Four in May, and he was named MVP of that competition. And if you're wondering, that happens to be a very highly touted and respected competition, just so you know, if you're not super familiar with European basketball. Arvydas already has experience playing against some of the best teams in Europe, and at the ripe old age of 19, he shows a lot of promise. Again, he's a lengthy shooter with good basketball IQ, basically what you come to expect from Eastern European big men these days. Then you've got Roby, a 6'9" forward from Nebraska who brings in decent ball handling for his height, and was really known as a solid running in transition big man. Another real slender guy, doesn't have much of a shooting touch at all, so he's got a lot of developing to do, but most scouting reports you're going to find are going to say that he's worth investing in because of his high potential. And as a quick note, it seems that the NBA is really starting to respect second-round players again, which I really like, whereas in the 90s and early 2000s, the second round had entirely fallen off the earth. Like, if you were a second rounder, you might as well not show up to training camp type of thing, right? Because they were so obsessed with high school players and all of that, nonsense. It wasn't a healthy place for the draft and for like NBA recruitment back in those days. And I think that right now with the development of the G League and with NBA scouts really going back to loving experienced college players more, second rounders have more respect on their place in their role nowadays as well. So anyway, Jordan Bone from Tennessee. So if Detroit needed wings and point guards, and those were their biggest needs right here, then it's good that they drafted like 30 wing players and then got their 1 point guard, showing what their priorities were, I guess. But Jordan Bone, another 5.8 assists per game in the SEC last year, which was a really tough conference top to bottom. Bone then went and strengthened his draft stock quite a bit at the Combine by testing very well in the athletic categories. 36-inch standing vertical, 42.5-inch max vertical, fastest times out of all participants in the shuttle run and the lane agility drills. And at 6'3", he's got the tools that a team would want in a modern-day point guard. Bone apparently struggles to make the right passes at the right times, which is what is making him a second-round pick. But otherwise, there's a lot to like about this guy. So Detroit was a playoff team who was missing a few pieces. They're not in rebuild mode, so these picks, who are all mostly projects, are pretty solid, if not a little bit redundant. I'll give them a B-, which is, about an average, rating, because these guys that meet their needs, but they're all projects who won't contribute anytime soon and won't help Detroit win instantly, win now. So there's that. The Orlando Magic made my live stream co-host, Jim Strickland, a.k.a. Jim and M, very happy by taking his Auburn Tiger, Chuma Okeke. This came as a bit of surprise to most, of course, as the 6'7" forward, very defensive-oriented forward, tore his ACL in March. ACL tears aren't really as big a deal in basketball anymore with how advanced those recovery procedures have become, so the injury isn't much to worry about, even if it'll probably take him entirely out of his rookie year if Orlando wants to play it safe. But Orlando, much like Detroit, is in a position of not needing an instant contributor at this position. So they're willing to be patient with his recovery and development and hoping that, this time next year we're looking at a potential rising star in Chuma Okeke. He is an elite defender. He can guard on the perimeter. He can guard down low. He's an opportunist when it comes to steals and blocks. It's a question of whether or not his shot develops well enough to make him a big-time 3-and-D guy. But it's totally reasonable to expect him to at least become Michael Kidd-Gilchrist or Justice Winslow type of player. And I mean that as a total compliment. I feel like sometimes those guys get knocks because of maybe they have rough offensive games. But I think that Okeke's got the tools to be the best of that breed of 6'7" wing, not really like primary ball handlers type of player right there, especially if he continues to improving his already decent three-point stroke. I'll easily give Orlando an A- on this. There's no real risk. It's a smart move, considering that if Okeke were healthy, we would probably see his draft stock rise in the same way that fellow March Madness superstars Jarrett Culver and DeAndre Hunter's draft stock rose in March. So, solid pick by the Magic, because they can afford to be patient. Not everything in sports is about win now, ladies and gentlemen. Indiana Pacers, and that means it's Goga time. That's right. The Pacers took viral sensation Goga Bitadze from Georgia. No, not that Georgia. With the 18th pick. Goga, of course, went viral when there was a photo of him that got out on the internet of him looking forlorn and alone at his interview table as reporters flooded Zion next door. Goga is your next Vucevic or Jonas Valanciunas. He's 6'11 or so, 250 pounds plus, quick feet for a big man. As you tend to get with these European prospects, he's quite polished offensively already. That's something that's stressed at an early age, is offensive polish over there in European developing players. He's got really good work ethic. Scouts praise him on that. What sets him apart, though, is that he actually has some very good defensive timing that you don't always see early on with European players. That being said, he is not a perimeter guy at all. And so it's strange that Indiana, having already had Miles Turner, one of the most underrated centers in the league, and a rapidly developing into his own Domantas Sabonis, Goga's role in Indy is questionable. More than anything else, the Pacers saw that he was the best player available, regardless of position, looked at the other players available, saw they didn't really fit any needs, just went for it. You can't blame them for that, but they badly needed something on the perimeter, and they didn't have the luxury of getting that. So I'm going to give him just a C pick, average, because he's good. He's quite good, and it'll be fun to see what he does as a pro. And maybe they can trade him to a team that needs a big man so they can get some perimeter touch instead. Maybe not, though. We'll see. San Antonio Spurs come in next. The Spurs continue to do Spurs things in this draft. They're looking for players who fit their system more than anything else. And they didn't really make any major moves to go up for a superstar like other teams were trying to do. They just continue to do their Spurs thing and work their system. And be honest, I really have no doubt that all of this will work out for the Spurs because that's who they are. They picked up Luka Samanic from Croatia, their first pick out of their 2 first-rounders. He's a 6'11 forward, boasting a silly 8'11 standing reach. He's still pretty slim, only about 225 pounds or so. The Spurs will expect him to fill out just a little bit, but he's already got the physical attributes as an offensive, lanky forward 4-spot that Pop loves in a low-post player, right? Think Tim Duncan, LaMarcus Aldridge, all that. Luka's issue right now is that he does a whole lot of things well, but he doesn't really do anything like super well. He doesn't have that signature skill to him. He's not a great perimeter shooter. He's good running in the transition and fast break, but he's not going to blow you away. So it's kind of going to be up to the Spurs to develop him into a player who does a few of those things really well. But let's face it, it's the Spurs. Give him 2 years, he'll become, Nikola Jokic or some nonsense like that. And what was probably their best move, San Antonio went hard after Keldon Johnson later in the first round, snagging the fairly coveted 6'6 wing from Kentucky. Johnson's a fairly safe Kentucky prospect, looking like he's going to be a solid defender with a reliable jump shot, fill that coveted 3-and-D slot, not necessarily be a superstar, but doesn't have to be that type of player. He doesn't really create for himself. He's not much of a ball handler, but he has the size and strength to possibly run as like a small 4 if the Spurs ever want to do that sort of lineup. He's no Kawhi Leonard, but San Antonio will probably use him to fill a similar role, and that's why they went after him. Keep in mind, San Antonio is the most system-run team in the NBA. They go after players that fit a system more than they go about anything else. So when they draft a guy, you got to think that they think he's going to fit their system well. In the second round, San Antonio went after my dude, Quindary Weatherspoon from Mississippi State. On a personal note, I've had the pleasure of watching Q in person ever since he was in high school in the state tournament over here, throwing alley-oops to his younger brother. He is the quintessential great college player, right? Kind of do everything for you pretty well, but not necessarily stand out enough to be a top, prospect, all of that stuff. He's a 6'4 guard. Actually, when he was recruited, I remember him being listed as 6'5", and then he got on campus. They put him, his sophomore year, he slipped down to 6'4". I swear they were going to lose an inch every year with Q Weatherspoon on the roster there. But he's a 6'4 guard. He played mostly the 3 position, sometimes even playing undersized 4 in some lineups at Mississippi State because his college team was really guard heavy. Because of this, you never saw him play in a facilitator role as a primary facilitator, which is really where he would probably have to play in the pros given his size and the fact that he's not a phenomenal athlete. But here he is outshining his former teammate and recruiting rival Malik Newman, who left MSU. MSU went out to Kansas, declared early. He's now in the G League. Q Weatherspoon is a really good defender. And while he's not going to really blow you away with speed or his vertical, he's got great lateral quickness. Not only that, but he's quite opportunistic with stealing the ball. Mississippi State loved to run a full court press that created a lot of turnovers. He was a catalyst for that. And then this past season, he low-key shot just a hair under 40% from three-point range, a stat that surprised me, and I have season tickets to Mississippi State games, so that's pretty interesting. The reason he got drafted, because as much as I love him, I did not think he would get drafted at all. The reason he got drafted is because he went off and had a really good performance at the Portsmouth Invitational earlier this year after his college season ended, where he actually led his team in scoring over the entire tournament. So this is a classic Spurs, just seeing a guy they think will fit the system and going for it type of thing. But scouts seem to really like him. ESPN's Jonathan Givney, I don't know how you pronounce Jonathan's last name, I apologize, but he even compared him to a Gary Harris type of guard wing player, which I think is pretty interesting. Kind of fits his style now that you think about it. I'll be rooting for him to make it in the league. I don't know if he will or not, but there you go. All right, all in all, this is a very San Antonio draft class. We don't know what to expect from Samanic yet. Q Weatherspoon will have the odds against him ever really making his way into the NBA. But then Keldon Johnson is, a good, safe pick, and it's probably enough to earn the Spurs a solid B+ rating for their draft. Could easily be an A if Samanic fits what they need and doesn't turn out to be Tiago Splitter. The Philadelphia 76ers up next. What do you get a team who won the draft a lot in recent years, then stole away one of the top two-way players in the entire league in Jimmy Butler, and yet still feels like they're in turmoil most of the time? Well, how about you get him another two-way wing, just in case Butler goes? Matisse Thybulle from Washington, 6'6" wing, 7-foot wingspan. He has the skill to play a really solid athletic offensive game in terms of like finishing and all that. But he shines as a defender. He had a silly, these are his per 40 minute stats. You ready for this? 4.4 steals, 2.8 blocks per game last year. That's just insane. He reads passing lanes really well. And if he is good enough on his feet to be a good perimeter defender, Washington plays a lot of zone. So for him to be more of a man-to-man guy, he has to prove himself a bit. But if Jimmy Butler, does end up leaving, then this kid might have the defensive instincts to replace some of what Jimmy Butler does on defense. That's still a big question mark, of course, because Thybulle doesn't have an offensive game at all, really, especially not one he creates for himself. But he seems okay with it. He seems more motivated to be a great defender than he is to really improve offensive game. So, hey, maybe that's going to work for him. If that's not enough, though, in the second round, the 76ers grabbed Marial Shayok from Iowa State. Another 6'6" wing, 7-foot wingspan. He's a fifth-year collegiate player that really exploded in his final season at Iowa State. 18.7 points per game that year. Before then averaging, I think, just 8 a game, something like that. So Philly goes and picks one of the best perimeter defenders in the draft in Thybulle. I'm a big fan of that pick. People are going to ask questions about him on offense, but let's be honest. Philly doesn't need him to do anything on offense. They have like 4 other stars on the team that are going to be offensive options before him, and he doesn't have to do anything there. I'm going to give Philly a B+. Would have been higher, but they had to trade up in order to get Thybulle because I think Boston was messing with him and trying to tell him that they were going to draft him first. So that's why they've been going to drop that pick down a little bit. But OKC have this is a side note, they have one of the worst salary cap situations in the NBA. It doesn't impact their draft at all, but it's worth noting that it's a total mess. They snagged Darius Bazley with the 23rd pick. He's an interesting prospect because he skipped college entirely, which doesn't often help your draft profile. But I think the success that Mitchell Robinson found in his first season in the league is helping teams feel better about scouting Bazley. He's another one of those 6'6" wing players with some guard skills to play on the perimeter. He's projected to be a decent defender, but his offensive skills seem limited. But the main thing about him is that we have little to work with here. He didn't play in college, and in high school, he kind of played on a smaller high school and was inconsistent even then. He's built like Paul George, and he has good defensive instincts like Paul George. Of course, PG-13 was much more athletic and has developed into one of the deadliest scorers and shooters we have in the NBA. I mean, he was an MVP candidate this past season, for goodness sake. So we can't really look at Bazley and compare him to Paul George in any way other than maybe the physique. I mean, the comparison's in there. There's a lot of unknowns here, even with Darius Bazley performing well enough in pre-draft workouts that scouts really started moving him up and up and up in their boards. He's a total unknown, and it makes him hard to grade at any level. So I don't know. Let's just say C. C. Why not? Here, sure. Let's just go with it. Portland drafted Nasir Little at the 25th pick. When he fell all the way down to 25, Portland just couldn't help but snatch him up. Another 6'6" wing, 7'1" wingspan. Nice. He's got a decent, if somewhat untested, shooting touch. At the beginning of the North Carolina season, or the season in general, when he was at North Carolina, there we go, he was projected in a lot of mock drafts as being a top 5 pick, but he slipped all the way down to 25 because he kind of was unimpressive in his production in his freshman year at UNC. He's got a good looking shot, even if he wasn't really hitting them very well this past year, and I think a lot of scouts look at it and say, hey, we can work with that. That encourages the Trailblazers. He's not a great ball handler right now, but he's going to Portland. You got CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard. You don't ever have to have him handle the ball. He's going to be the perfect wing player to complement those two guys. His offensive question marks, they don't need a quick answer there. He's got time to develop his jump shot. They need him to play good perimeter defense, get those rebounds that he does so well with his athleticism, catch those alley-oops from those guards. He could be the perfect complementary piece that the Blazers need to help them out in the weakened West this year. I'm going to straight up give him an A on this. He's got a lot of potential, and he fell into a place that doesn't need him to contribute significantly, so he's got time to develop. Love it. This is a team that had to rely a lot on Mo Harkless and Jake Layman in the wing position this past year. I like this kid already. The LA Clippers were a solid team last year, stressing opponents out in the playoffs. They're going to add to that stress where they picked up big man Mfiondu Kabengele, my bad, on his first name. A massive 6'10", 256-pounder from Florida State. Kind of brings back some memories of Maurice Spates from the other Florida school. Other Florida school? Only a bit chunkier than I think Spates was. Kabengele has a decent enough offensive game. He connected on 37% of long-range shots last year, which is really cool. So the most surprising thing about him, though, is not the shooting. It's the fact that he actually was surprisingly good attacking from the perimeter in for a man of his size, which is really promising because he could be a good fit for a team that's made up of, some kind of similar players in Danilo Gallinari or Montrezl Harrell, right? Kabengele is not a great defender by any stretch, which is odd considering his size. You'd think maybe he could boss some people around, but he hasn't proven that yet. But I think the Clippers don't need that right now and don't want that right now. Don't really care. They need more low post offense because their current slew of actual post players don't give that to them, and that's what he can. In the second round, they grabbed fellow Florida State Seminole Terrence Mann, a G League player. I'll be honest, I don't know much about Terrence. That's largely because he wasn't really projected to get drafted. He had a great performance at the G League Combine, which took place not too long ago. And the Clippers apparently thought that was enough to take him and use him in the G League, put him in G League. I don't know. All in all, I can't really give the Clippers more than a C-, and I'm tempted to even go with a D here because as much as I just praised Kabengele, if you want an offensive big man and you're in the low first round, why don't you gamble on Bol Bol? I mean, I know that Kabengele has the skill set to be the reliable scorer that they need, but even if he does end up being that, isn't he going to be a defensive liability? Like, where's the growth there? Does he have that potential to grow? LA probably could have gone bold here, gone for Bol Bol, try to push them into Western contention. I don't know. I can't give him a bad grade because Kabengele is a really fine player, but I want to, Golden State picked Jordan Poole from Michigan at the 28th spot, making him the final first-round pick that we will actually discuss. So there you go. Jordan Poole is an offensive-minded guard who it seems the Warriors are wanting to maybe provide some instant perimeter shooting because they're going to lack a little bit this upcoming season due to injuries. The thing about Poole is that he's pretty wildly inconsistent. A lot of times he made some dumb decisions or disappeared entirely in games, which means that he won't necessarily help the Warriors rebound from their injuries and finals loss this season. He's going to need time to develop consistency. It's too much for an inconsistent rookie to jump in and be an instant contributor. But you give him time under Steve Kerr and learning from Steph Curry, and hey, he can develop into a solid player. Golden State, over time, it's going to take time though. Golden State also added 2 second-rounders. Alen Samalic from Serbia, I don't know, probably butchered that name. Eric Pascal from Villanova. Good grief, I'm struggling. Can you tell it's a longer podcast than normal? Allen is a G League player who at 6'10 and a whopping 215 is a weird prospect to watch. Not just like look at him physically, but actually watch him. He's only 18 and he's in the G League. And in the G League, he did this super weird thing where he averaged more offensive rebounds than defensive rebounds. I don't know if I've ever heard of that before. Maybe Tristan Thompson for a stretch of games, but not for like G League the whole season. It's weird. Apparently, the Warriors have wanted him for a few years, so they have some sort of grand plan that I don't know about, can't begin to understand. The Warriors are a lot like the Spurs in that they have a system and a scheme and a plan for players, and they go after particular guys that fit their scheme. So I'm going to trust their judgment here. Eric Pascal from Villanova, big body post player, has a lot of efficiency in finishing around the rim. At 6'7", but 250 plus pounds, he can play physical defense and is developing a decent three-point shot, which scouts praise him for. The thing about him is that at the end of the day, he's from Villanova, and I know not to rule out Villanova prospects at all because Jay Wright seems to prepare them pretty well for transition to the pros. That said, Pascal looks like he's probably drafted to maybe learn some from Draymond Green, be cover for him in a couple of years, something like that. The Warriors did the best they could with what they had after a weird and rough playoff run that left them with not a whole lot of resources. This is probably a C-plus draft class at best. There weren't really any reliable options. They needed someone who could contribute shooting immediately, and there wasn't anyone that they trusted there. Yeah, it's rough for them, but Brooklyn started out the second round. This is the part of the podcast where I probably have to really stretch to find things to talk about, but thankfully Brooklyn took Nick Claxton, a high upside big man from Georgia, and yes, this time it is that Georgia. And I happen to like Claxton. He's a very mobile 7-footer, slender, doesn't have much girth on him, but could probably put on some muscle as he progresses as a pro. He will probably see G League time to develop because he's really good moving around the rim, but the thing about him is that he seems to be lost sometimes during the game, kind of overwhelmed by it a bit. But you give him time to develop, and you could see him becoming a JaVale McGee type player probably. Brooklyn also snagged the wonderfully named Jalen Hands from UCLA. He's a 6'3" point guard, tested well in athletic categories, similar to Jordan Bone from Tennessee. Maybe a bit unproven as to how he fits in like the modern point guard slot. He averaged 6.1 assists per game at UCLA last season, which is really good. But his role and future in Brooklyn are kind of uncertain because how does he fit? When you only have when you only have second round picks in general, and you pick a development prospect like Nick Claxton, but you don't pick Bol, then I can't give you a better draft grade than a C-. Even if I like Claxton, if you're going to take a prospect, risk reward prospect, why not take Bol in that? I don't know. I don't get it. Sacramento, the Kings were another team with only second round picks. They started off with 6'7" guard Justin James from Wyoming. He's a very thin 180 pounds. He played on a super terrible Wyoming team, but he showed some shooting potential from range, both set shots, off the dribble. He wasn't really on anyone's scouting radar, so it's hard to find much info on him, and it's hard to call this a very good or bad pick in general, barring any major surprises. They also snagged Kyle Guy from Virginia, 25th in the second round. We all know how good a shooter Kyle Guy is. We saw it on display in the tournament on the national championship game. Kyle Guy's shorter, though. He's only about listed at 6'2". He doesn't stand out in like the defensive side of things, but then again, he's a very, very good shooter, moves well without the ball, is a good shooter off of screens. He's got a specialty skill set, which is often the difference between making a roster and not. Finally, they picked up Vanja Marinkovic from Serbia. He's another 6'7" shooting guard. He was this year's Mr. Irrelevant, going last in the NBA draft. Perimeter scorer. Sacramento was clearly going for a particular thing here in long-range shooting, but he's another unproven prospect who needs time to develop. They got two potential but iffy shooters. They got, Matthew Dellavedova, who can't play defense. It's not a great draft for the Kings. I'm going to straight up give them an F. Straight up giving them an F. I'm doing it. I told myself I wasn't going to do it, but I'm going to do it now. The Denver Nuggets are the only bold team in the draft. 2 years in a row, they're the only bold team. Last year, they took a chance on Michael Porter Jr. when no one else was. This year, they stopped Bol Bol's heartache, taking him in the second round. So who in the world did Bol Bol, murder in order to slip this far in the draft? I mean, yeah, I get that he had the foot injuries. Sure, there's questions about work ethic, but he had talent and, hype around him where just not long ago people were saying lottery pick. How does he drop all the way to the second? What did he do? Either way, Denver's a great team. Very talented, one of the best teams in the West. And now with the Warriors being very injured, one of the possible favorites to win things in the West, right? Bol Bol will probably reap the benefits of learning in Denver. And Denver will probably reap the rewards of being patient with Michael Porter last year and this year, Bol Bol. Absolute physical specimen. I don't even really need to say it again, but I'm going to just rehash it. 7'3", 21 points a game on 57% shooting, 53% from deep. He only played in 9 games, I think, actually, at Oregon. But in those 9 games, he was quick, agile. He can dunk without really having to jump at all. That's got to be worth the draft pick, even if you're worried about things. And I do need to correct myself on the live stream last night. I kind of downplayed his injury, but what he does have is a fractured navicular bone, which is one of the more worrisome foot injuries that you can get. And I think people look at him and probably think about his dad and kind of how frail his dad was, I guess. And they get worried there. But I don't know, 7'3" shooter who gets to learn the game behind 7-foot point guard and fellow second rounder Nikola Jokic. I think that's a good fit for both the team and the player. And the fact that Denver identified Jokic in the second round years ago and picked him and developed him into what he is now might be a sign that they know what they're doing. So you know what? Screw it. This is my totally emotional pick, irrational. I'm going to give Denver A+ just for doing it and going with Bol Bol. They took a risk to try to become a title contender, and I respect it. The Los Angeles Lakers only had a second-round pick here. One of my favorite musicians, Joey Dosick, big-time Lakers fan, said on Twitter, "Congrats to Talen Horton-Tucker. I don't know who you are, but good luck starting for us next year." The Lakers are in a bit of a mess right now, trying to figure out the aftermath of the Anthony Davis trade. In the process, they snagged 6'4", 235-pound point guard Talen Horton-Tucker from Iowa State. At his weight, obviously conditioning is called into question, but apparently Iowa State used him in a very, very interesting playmaking role where he lined up anywhere from the 1 all the way down to the 4 as a 6'4" power forward, point forward there. I think that's pretty intriguing. He's clearly much shorter than Draymond Green, but if we've said before that teams love to try to fill that Draymond Green role on their rosters these days, this is the Lakers kind of doing that. It could be a good fit for LA if he develops some. I mean, LA likes to run through a playmaking 3. LA is a very point forward dominated team with LeBron James anyway. So you got this kid in Horton-Tucker, massive wingspan that's almost a foot longer than his height, which is crazy, but a lot to overcome in order to make an impact in LA and even really make the roster itself. This is a C- pick, but with the hopes that he is the youngest college player drafted, I believe. So there's hopes that he is still developing as a player. The Jazz had 3 second-rounders. They started with Jarrell Brantley from College of Charleston, 6'7", 250-pound, shot-creating big. It makes him kind of unique compared to some of the other undersized 4s that we see these days that are more like defensive and playmaking oriented. This dude kind of looks like he would be like Jason Maxiell with a better shot, you know? They also snagged 6'1" point guard Justin Wright-Foreman from Hofstra. He's known as a great off-the-dribble shooter. Scouts really like his long-range touch, but he is one of those that they don't know if he brings anything else out that will help Utah at all, or if he has to have the ball in his hands to do anything well. Finally, there is Maioni, a 6'6" wing from Yale. He's apparently a fantastic athlete who just hasn't really figured out what to do with his athleticism. Those are very important natural gifts, and they're invaluable because you either have those natural physical athletic gifts or you don't, right? So if this guy's able to work on his discipline and his shooting mechanics and focuses just on trying to be a 3-and-D player, then, he might be able to fill that Jay Crowder role in Utah eventually, but it's going to take a lot of time. When you look at all three of these guys, I don't really mind these picks. Even if the real benefit to them and the only benefit to them is that we got to see an Ivy League guy drafted for the first time since 1995, I still kind of like these picks. I'm going to go B- for the Jazz, And then finally, we have the NBA champion Toronto Raptors. Their only draft pick, Dewan Hernandez from Miami. Hernandez is a 6'10", 233-pound post player who has had to show out a little bit in the combine and other postseason activities because the NCAA screwed him out of his junior season, which is a lot of fun. He's a bit of a raw prospect, still trying to figure out what he has as far as an offensive skill set. But in Toronto, Serge Ibaka is getting older, and Toronto would love to train his successor, I'm sure. So, how do I even grade this? Draft grade, it doesn't even matter to Toronto. They won the title, and now they have to entirely focus on trying to convince Kawhi Leonard to re-sign, right? That's it. They don't care about the draft. Why should I care about giving them a grade? You know what? I'm going to give them an A+, just because I can. A+ for the Raptors in the draft, because you know what? They won the NBA title, I guess. Whew, long episode, but we had to run through the entire draft. Those are my quick thoughts on everyone who I thought did well, who I thought needed to have done better. Interesting draft. Excited for Summer League, free agency, all that good stuff. As we get into the summer, it might take a little bit of time away from, on some of the slower weeks, away from the podcast. But chances are I will be here, hopefully, at least every other week with whatever's going on, especially free agency gets real crazy, like it looks like it might. But I will be here for you to talk about the NBA as we lead up to the season and as we have more drama unfold. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. This has been 40 Minutes of Hell, and I will talk to you next time.